is about to be, because as many of you know, this is just the beginning, and I hope you feel that as well.
Yep.
This is just, you can sit down, I'm going to embarrass him. That's my dad walking in really late right now. Hi. I'll tell him that we waited for him. We didn't actually. This is really a small gesture from us to you, to thank you very much for being in our corner. Many of you are very, very familiar faces who are out there knocking on doors with us, making phone calls, distributing lit. And some of you were more in the wings, running perhaps some Twitter wars, soliciting people at your churches, in your neighborhoods and community groups. And so we want to make sure that people who have been involved from near or far in any capacity knew that how much you meant to us, and that we plan to continue to use this energy going forward. As you know, it's a rule of, Dad, you can correct me, is it physics? Energy cannot be destroyed or created?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Third law of thermodynamics.
Okay, so he's a scientist in the family. So, third law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. And I've told this to our top men before. The energy that we saw within the campaign, it was every single one of you, your flames, coming together. And when we put our little flames, our little matches together, we got a huge fire that, frankly, the entire world saw. We made headlines as far as Russia, all across the state. Some Chinese headlines. It was really, really cool. And now that the campaign is over, well, we can't destroy that energy. We're just going to roll it into a new project, and indeed grow this flame and attract more matches, if you will, to a big old ball of fire. So I was reflecting a little bit today, because of course it is a very, very special weekend in not just Canadian history, but the globe's history, marking the centenary, 100 years since 1918, November 11th, at 11 a.m., when the first Big Brothers War came to an end. And I was reflecting on it a lot in the Canadian context. I know we've got a very intelligent group of patriots here, so I don't need to go through an entire Canadian history lesson. One of my degrees was in Canadian history, so I'm a little bit of a nerd about these things, so if you'll indulge me for 5 minutes. As you well know, at the time, we were just a dominion. And so when Britain declared war on Germany, we didn't have any choice but to basically go to war. And there are so many nuggets of the Canadian spirit, an indication of the fighters, the patriot spirit that is not just in this soil, but I do believe runs in our veins as Canadians in this country. You know, when war was first declared, conscription was not yet in play. And before the posters went out calling for some 20,000 men to enlist, 100,000 had already enlisted. And this was at a time when Canada didn't even really know who we were yet. And it was World War I, 100 years ago tomorrow that it ended, that formed our identity as a nation. And how was the Canadian identity formed? It was through worthwhile fights, through worthwhile battles. You know, there are so many primary sources of everyone from, Arthur Currie and top commanders and generals, down to just citizens who would talk about how when the Germans would see the Canadian corps arrive over the hill, that's when they prepared for the worst. These were men who went into battle, who started fighting under the British flag, and as people know very well, I am very, very, very proud of our and, if you will say, tricultural heritage, of course, including, quite rightly, our Native brothers and sisters as well. It doesn't mean I subscribe to the new national anthem where this is the traditional territory of blah, blah, blah. Is that okay? Is it better?
Yeah.
Any more? Okay, fantastic. So we started fighting under the Brits, and that's when the Canadians started saying, actually, we kind of just want to fight with ourselves. And that's what we saw happen in Vimy. For the very first time, Canadians fought as Canadians. I believe it was all 4 divisions coming together and fighting as one. And what happened was, for the very first time in world history, a European colonial power defeated a European power on European soil. This is an amazing history. And again, this is part of our foundational history and foundational mythology, psyche, and indeed our identity. There's a story from one of the soldiers who emerged from many of the great battles that we saw in World War I, and he said, we marched into Vimy as Albertans and Nova Scotians, but we marched out as Canadians. Why do I continue to bring this up? because this is where our Canadian identity was formed. And today, our Canadian identity is being threatened in every single corner. The history that I just shared with you, mark my words, if we continue on the same trajectory in 5, 10 years, all of that will be erased with the current indoctrination that is happening and re-education that is happening in our schools, with the current re-education of even new Canadians that we're bringing over. I'm sure we have new Canadians in this audience. The citizenship procedure that you went through is not akin to what folks are now being asked to regurgitate. This European history, with, yes, acknowledgement to our Indigenous roots as well, is all being erased for a new mythology, a post-national, borderless, multi-culti, everything goes, we don't know what the heck we stand for. And let me tell you, when a nation is confronted with real evil, a nation that doesn't know who the heck they are, they're not going to stand up and fight. Look no further than how our country, I'm sorry to say, rolled over when Justin Trudeau said, we're going to pull our jets out against the fight against ISIS. We didn't really do very much about it. The millions of men who, between the two brothers' wars, the great wars, 100 years ago tomorrow, and then 20 years thereafter, they didn't march to trenches. They didn't march into their tanks for some push-button key words like globalism, diversity, and all that jargon, and pardon me, but crap. They didn't. They did it for dignity. They did it for honor. They did it for family. They did it for country. They did it for their forefathers. And God, they did it for a very defined vision of a future for a nation that they understood. We have lost all of that. So why am I going on about this? Damn it, I ran for mayor. Okay, I'll tell you why. Because unlike the new frontier, the new evil that we now combat, which frankly is open borders globalism. That is the name of our enemy as far as I'm concerned. These are people who believe in turning Toronto into a sanctuary city, who believe that the sacrosanct and legitimate 49th parallel that is beneath us can be erased without even going to the ballot box once, okay? All of those policies are not big ideas, globalization, interconnect. They all affect us at home. All political issues are indeed local. I'm not fighting for some faraway, lofty ideas. I'm a realist. I'm fighting for my family, some of whom members are in the audience today, for my friends, a lot of members in the audience today, okay? And my children's future. I'm not fighting for something far away, and that's why running for mayor made sense. So I want to tell you all a bit about what happened behind the scenes and some of the lessons learned, some of which you might be familiar with. You know, it's funny, I was talking to some of the guys, and I've been very blessed. I had about 10 to 20, kind of ebbed and flowed, let's say 15 guys who were really there through thick and thin. But the problem with being the only girl sometimes is that they don't get the references. And so I was telling them all, I said, well, thanks everyone for complimenting my outfit today. And they're like, yeah, you look fine. So I was like, hey guys, I want this to be like the Bachelor post show, you know, we're peeking behind the scenes a little, and they're kind of looking at me like, we don't know what she's talking about right now. So I want to tell you a little bit about what happened behind the scenes. You want me to move over here? All right, that's cool, sorry. If you can't hear me at any point, let me know. And if at any point you want to interject, just throw your hand up, that's no problem. So how did I go from YouTuber into running for mayor? It was actually very interesting. I have this philosophy that life is somewhat a series of doors, and that just about most of them can be open to you. It's just a matter of timing. And so what happened is I was on the airplane back from actually visiting my father in Greece this summer when I was reading on Twitter that Blaine Lastman, that's Mel's son, had dropped out of the mayoral race. And I thought, holy smokes, I looked over to my fiance, I said, John Tory is going to sleepwalk into incumbency. This is a guy who, I'm afraid to go to bloody well Yorkdale Mall and downtown, and there's shootings and stabbings and everything everywhere. He's just going to sleepwalk back into it. And my fiance, without missing a beat, he's got his paper there, he looks up, he goes, run then. And then looked back. So I spent the next 8.5, 9 hours of the flight basically doing an opportunity cost benefit analysis in my head. And I thought, well, are they going to damage my reputation? I've already done that. Are they going to cut off my sources of income? They've already done that. Realistically speaking, what do I have to lose? And if I don't win, it's going to be one heck of an experience. Let's see. So sure enough, I started, and my aunt who's in the audience today was very much my plus one. I remember she had to hide her identity because when we were meeting with a couple of politicians, like, don't tell them you're my aunt, say you're my assistant or something like that. So she was very cool about that. At the beginning, we just kind of started knocking on doors. We really didn't know what we were doing. I had worked on 4 different political campaigns before, but the sort of political apparatchiks, etc., that I was used to working with, we couldn't afford, or they were too afraid to come on record as supporting me. So I'll never forget, we had one event at a church parking lot. I said, everyone come meet me. I'll distribute some clipboards. I didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe 5 to 10 people would come. We had probably about 40 people show up. And from that moment onwards, our campaign took on a complete life of its own. What I saw was the emergence of, and I'm going to be completely honest because that's all I know how to do. Ezra used to tell me, Faith, you know what? It's your blessing, but it's also your curse. Too much truth. What I saw was the emergence of, frankly, a new class of young male leadership, where while I was able to do what I do and what you saw, these guys were really taking life by the reins behind the scenes, setting up things without me having to delegate whatsoever. It was really, really fantastic. And for people who, can I move this a little bit here because I may have a bit of an echo, is that okay? For people who knock millennials and say that, you know, that a lot of us are a spoiled, etc. class, I'm here with the good news that many of the men who you see at this table, and many more who couldn't be here today because of work, family life, school, etc., these are men who have the right stuff. This was incredibly an edifying experience for me, that there is a new class of men that while there are not trenches perhaps or tanks for them to get into, they are very well aware that this is war, and that they want to preserve what is good and right in this country for the sake of their families, both here, now, and the promise of the future. So, yes, here we go, you men. So, and I thank God for them because, of course, as you well know, we had no shortage of new wars being thrown at us in small battles along the way. So, first things first, John Stuart Mill, great father of all things liberal democratic, he used to say that the only thing worse than governmental tyranny is social tyranny. And by which he meant it's not just the government telling you what to do, it's your peers, and you know, kind of like this Red Scare and new McCarthyism that now exists. We're trying to book campaign events, and we've got Antifa shutting them down right, left, and center. I'm trying to get a campaign office, I can't rent out a space, because again, Antifa. I think we were the first political campaign in all of Canadian history that could not host a legitimate campaign event like this during the campaign. I mean, who's doing what over here? I think that they probably imagined us all to be in white hoods doing, you know, some other weird stuff. But, and didn't have a campaign office either, and not for lack of will, but for lack of ability, because the social tyrannical forces are so palpable right now that they acted as roadblocks to us participating freely in the democratic process. Now, from there, we marched forward. We were able to garner funds to run a real campaign. And of course, you saw what happened thereafter when we tried to engage in legitimate business transactions, legal ones, which should have been legally protected with Bell Media and the rest of it, and Rogers as well. Well, that we had ourselves blocked. This after politicians blocked us from debates. Now, I don't know about you, I have a feeling that a lot of people in the audience here today are simpatico with our political ideology. But I'll tell you, knocking on doors, we had a lot of people who were centrist or even left of center who said, I just don't like the fact that you don't have freedom of speech in this race. And that's why I'm voting for you. And we won't talk too much about the numbers, but you know, I don't want to sound crazy, but there's a lot of interesting mathematics there. I will say this as well. For all of the media onslaught against us and the names that they called us, I'll let you in on a little secret. Behind closed doors, while they were calling us these horrible names of white nationalists and neo-Nazis and what have you, I'm going to let them in on a little secret of what we discovered at the doors. The truth is, this is going to sound bad, and I'm sorry, but when we got to the doors, whenever there was a white woman that opened the door, we kind of rolled our eyes because we're like, oh God, we're going to get a lecture now. It was actually the new Canadians that were the most on board with deporting illegal migrants, that were the most on board about being serious with the crime problem in our city. And so there's a real disconnect that's happening right now. You know, for a media class that bleats all the time about diversity, I think that it's them who need some diversity within their ranks. Because I think that they are completely out of touch on, frankly, the biggest issue that is now facing all of Western civilization, and that is of mass migration. And they're trying to paint it as a one-dimensional thing of racists, bigots, white nationalists, and neo-Nazis are against it, and all the normal good people are for open borders. But let me tell you, what we found at the doors was quite the opposite, and that it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is, where you come from. If you live in Canada, it's usually because you want to live in Canada. It's usually because you want to pay into a system that you expect to get things back from, and you want to respect it and contribute to it, not just suck from it like a leech. So that was some of what we experienced, and I just want to leave with this. I'm not going to babble for too long, because I imagine that people have questions and I want to answer them more there. I'm of the philosophy, and I said this during the campaign, after the campaign, and I'll continue to say it, and who knows, maybe I'll write a book about it. I should get to that sooner than later. I believe that that what happened to the Faith Goldy for Mayor campaign here in Toronto is a blueprint for how right-wing thinkers will be treated in politics going forward. We saw this almost overnight. As soon as we were out of our election, we ran into the US midterms. And what happened? CNN blocked Trump's ads. This had never been done before, and yet they had the Toronto model. They thought, boy, that looks good. And they did the same thing. CNN, even Fox engaged in it, and a bunch of the big media conglomerates ended up blocking Donald Trump. Now, I want to draw your attention to one thing that is going to be on my radar going forward, and then talk to you a little bit about what our plan is going forward without giving too much away. We are going to, like I said, be harnessing this energy going forward, and what I would like us to focus on, and what we plan to focus on, everyone's like, Faith, when are you running for politics again? When are you going to do it? It's not the end, like I said. It's just a question of, you know, Andrew Breitbart used to say that politics is downstream from culture. I think the Canadian culture needs a bit of a slap in the face, to be honest. I think that people need a darn wake-up call in this country. We're a little too comfortable, and we're like frogs in the boiling water. Right now, Canada is the country facing the fastest rate of ethnic change in the world. Ahmed Hussein, himself a refugee, our Immigration and Refugees Minister, has now announced that we're going to be taking up over 40,000 people per year. That is a significant change, with, again, no democratic mandate. No one ever voted on this. When you consider the fact that we are a population of some 35 million people, we're going to be taking in well over 1 million people in every 3 years or less. That is a very fast rate of change. And when we tell you folks, they're not all heading to Nunavut. They're not all heading to northern Saskatchewan. They're coming here. They're coming to your backyard. And why should you care? Because we need to be enriched. That's what we keep on being told. When I look, and I was just saying this to one of the lovely ladies here today, that when I look at the European architecture and music and theater and literature, I think to myself, you know what this place needs? Enrichment. So they're telling you the same thing about Canada, right? And it's not just the cultural ideas of the enrichment that we've seen happen in places like Germany and Sweden. And by this enrichment, of course, I mean acid attacks, forced female genital mutilation, Taharush rape gangs, grooming gangs, all of this, okay, enrichment. But I also mean the economic standpoint. When you have a class of people who are coming in, who are in effect coming here for economic reasons, what does that mean to a welfare state? What does that mean to a system which is finite, has finite resources for giving out, and finite resources that are being contributed into it? And I'm going to be getting back onto my YouTube channel starting next week, but I want to flag something on everyone's radar that I will be discussing early next week. Because for me, this is the next chapter in Canada's wild history right now. And has anyone heard of the UN Migrant Pact? Very few people, a couple people. That's really, really
got to sign the petition.
I'll tell you why. Because I know this is a well-read audience. I know that this is an audience that pays attention to world events and Canadian history. the media went from a media blackout of our campaign to a media blackout of this suicide pact. So this is something that I'm going to be focusing on very much going forward, and then I'm going to wrap this up with telling you about where we're going to go as kind of a body politic, if you will, here. This UN suicide pact, which many countries have already said we're abstaining from, we're not going to take part of it. Part of that is Donald Trump was the first to do it. We've said, I believe, Slovakia, Hungary, obviously, with Viktor Orban, God Emperor, Poland, a few other nations, kind of that center part of the Schengen zone, have said we don't want anything to do with this, and thank God. I've read all 34 pages. I'm putting together a very thorough video with everything you need to know about it. Folks, this is the most sinister document I have ever read in my entire life.
Yep.
It seeks to completely eradicate the class of illegal migrant. It confuses refugee and economic migrant, so it affords all the rights of refugees to illegal migrants and to economic migrants, and it makes migration a human right. I don't know about you guys. I love, good and hard-working immigrants. I'd like to immigrate to a lot of places in the world, okay? But it's not a human right. There are borders, and they are to be respected, and for very good reasons. Different sets of laws, different sorts of fiscal and monetary policies, and what have you. Now, what is perhaps most sinister, from a journalistic standpoint and from a Canadian standpoint, is that it says that it will eliminate objection to migration. So what does that mean for someone who's in, and there's like a huge long section about it, for someone who's in the media? If I talk about how, hey, guess who's doing all the raping and the killing, and what's happening over here in Malmo, or what's happening to our own schoolyards across Canada. I don't know if any of you saw my reports about the Syrian migrant children who were sexually and physically and verbally assaulting Canadian children on Canadian soil, taxpayer soil. If I bring that stuff up, well, it's a hate fact now, and I can be charged with hate speech because our government has abdicated control of not just our system of immigration and migration, but now also of dissemination of information to the United Nations. Now, from a Canadian standpoint, why we should be so worried is because Ahmed Hussein has said that Canada is going to take a leading role in this. So this is something for us to look forward to. We're going to be signing that document in December. If you folks are interested, I'm thinking of possibly doing a protest. It's going to be cold, but I think that having some of us folks out there in Ottawa, I'm thinking about perhaps organizing a bus from kind of the GTA and getting us out there. I think it's important that we fight this. And because the U.S. is not a signatory, there's no media coming out of the U.S., and the Canadian media just doesn't give a damn. Okay, so the exciting part. What are we doing next? Like I said, we need to have a cultural shift here, kind of like a tectonic plate shift, okay, not something tiny. So what some of these men and myself are doing is basically coming up with ways, new strategies to help fund and help foster this Canada First mentality. And we're going to be looking at ways through the alternative media, through speaking events, through university tours, through book deals, through a lot of different ways, because we have to pincer maneuver the system. The same way that the system tried to pincer maneuver us, we're going to be everywhere, so they can't, frankly, screw us over on just one field, okay? And what we need to do is we need to get inside the minds and the hearts of the next generation who realizes that the globalist status quo has been tried and it doesn't work. We need to let them know that their ideas don't make them bigots or hateful, that loving your country's history, acknowledging your heritage, and being concerned for its future is healthy, normal human behavior. So this is some of what we're going to be doing. We're going to be having announcements early in the new year. I want these guys to have a nice Christmas break and relax. I'm also getting married in 3 weeks, so I should probably start planning that. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So it's very, very exciting. What I want to do, though, is I want to bring on these guys onto the stage. First of all, take a bow, and then I'm going to ask Jacob, Josh, and Malcolm, who's running around, who's hang tight. But if I could ask of all of you, and Peter, you're out there, to Brent, some of you guys, I'm sure, that are out there, who, and Dave, you guys over there, if you could get the top tier guys, you know who you are. Please come out here to get a round of applause from everyone, because these guys were my everything during this campaign, and I really couldn't have done it without them. Come on, you guys. Moving away from the back. He doesn't like it. There you go. All right, I'm going to get Josh, Jacob, and Malcolm to sit with me here for a little bit, and then we're going to open up a plenary session. So if anyone has any questions, just kind of project, and I'm going to let these guys stay here too if you have any questions for any of the guys when it comes to strategy or what it was like to work with me behind the scenes and just how many nachos I consume on a weekly basis.